We know that Troy is real. The problem is that archaeologists did not find one Troy. They found a mound which seems to be the remains of a city that was built, destroyed, and rebuilt for thousands of years. A cycle they group into 9 major periods. Somewhere inside those layers of history and periods of time may be the world that became the Trojan War. Fortified walls survive. Cities fell. Hittite kings wrote about a place called Wilusa and a Western power called Ahhiyawa. But if Homer's war has a place in history, which Troy was it? And what would count as proof? Hisarlık stands in northwestern Turkey, less than 5 kilometers from the southern entrance to the Dardanelles. That location is important, but not because archaeology has discovered a sign saying Troy. The identification rests on the site, the ancient landscape, the long history of a city later known as Ilion, and the accumulated work of generations of excavators. One of the first was Frank Calvert. He investigated Hisarlık before Heinrich Schliemann arrived and helped direct Schliemann to the mound. Schliemann had money, confidence, and an almost theatrical certainty that Homer could guide him into the Bronze Age. In the 1870s, his excavations made Troy famous around the world. They also created one of archaeology's most enduring warnings. Schliemann wanted the city of King Priam, so he drove into the mound in pursuit of its earliest levels, cutting through and removing later remains as he went. Then came the sensation, a glittering cache that he called Priam's treasure. There was only one rather serious problem. The city that produced it, Troy too, was roughly 1,000 years too early to be a plausible setting for a war at the end of the Bronze Age. Schliemann had not found Priam. He had found evidence that Hisarlık was far older, richer, and more complicated than he had imagined. Later excavators changed the question. Instead of asking whether the lowest burned city matched Homer, they separated the mound into periods and subphases, following walls, pottery, rebuilding, and destruction through time. The hunt for one legendary city became the archaeology of many real ones. For the world behind the Iliad, attention usually settles on the final centuries of the Bronze Age. Troy 6 was formidable. Its sloping stone walls, gates, and projecting towers belonged to a substantial fortified settlement with an occupied lower area beyond the citadel. But its ending is difficult to turn into Homer's war. Carl Blegen, one of the site's most influential excavators, believed Troy 6 had been destroyed by an earthquake. He looked instead to the settlement that followed, Troy 7a. In Troy 7a, people reused the old defenses and packed more buildings into the citadel. That settlement also ended in destruction. During the broad period in which a historical conflict might fit. So is that the answer? Not quite. A destroyed city does not name its attackers. Damage can come from earthquake, fire, internal crisis, raid or war. Dates are revised. Evidence is fragmentary. Even specialists have disagreed over which phase matters most. Archaeology gives us candidates. It does not give us a label reading, the Trojan War. The most tantalizing evidence was not found at Troy at all. Hundreds of kilometers to the east, the archives of the Hittite capital at Hattusa preserve diplomatic records from the late Bronze Age. Among them are references to a western land called Ahhiyawa, a place called Wilusa, and a ruler of Wilusa named Alaksandu. The resemblance is striking. Many scholars connect Ahhiyawa with the Mycenaean Greek world. Wilusa with the Greek name Wilios or Ilion, and therefore with Troy. One Hittite letter even refers to an earlier dispute over Wilusa. Across the surviving texts, Hittite rulers knew about conflicts in western Anatolia and treated Ahhiyawa as a serious power. This is not the Iliad, written in cuneiform. The tablets do not name Achilles. They do not describe Helen, a wooden horse, or a 10-year Greek siege. And the geography of Wilusa, though strongly supported, is not beyond all dispute. What the texts supply is something both less dramatic and more valuable. An independent picture of a region where an Anatolian state and a Mycenaean power could collide. Look at the map, and conflict seems almost inevitable. Troy stood near the Dardanelles, where the Aegean approaches the route toward the Sea of Marmara and the Black Sea. It is tempting to imagine a wealthy fortress controlling every ship that passed. That picture has often been repeated, and it has also been challenged. The scale of Troy's lower settlement, the volume of its trade, and its power over the straits remain subjects of argument. Archaeology does not require a Bronze Age toll booth or a commercial metropolis. But Troy did occupy a meeting point between Anatolia, the Aegean, and the Balkans. Its walls, location, and long survival show that this was not an empty corner of the ancient world. A raid, a local war, a struggle involving larger powers, or several events compressed by later storytellers would all fit the broad landscape better than the idea that the poem appeared from nothing. That is an interpretation, not a recovered event. So, was the Trojan War real? The city was real. A fortified late Bronze Age Troy was real. Mycenaean powers and Western Anatolian states were real, and Hittite records preserve disputes in the region. A conflict at or around Troy is plausible. More than one is possible. But archaeology has not recovered Homer's war. No destruction layer proves a 10-year siege. No document identifies Achilles, Priam, or Helen. And no wooden horse has stepped out of the earth. The most defensible verdict is that the story preserves a historical substrate. A real city, a real age of fortified kingdoms and real conflict, then reshapes it through centuries of memory and performance. That answer is less tidy than either myth or history. It is also more interesting. Troy is not a legend that archaeology simply confirmed. It is a place where ruins, royal archives, and epic poetry overlap without becoming the same kind of evidence. That is why Troy still matters. Not because archaeology proved the legend, but because it revealed the real world from which such a legend could grow.